Welcome to the edWebinar featuring Unruly Studios. My name is James, and today we're going to be talking about math confidence strategies to combat math anxiety in elementary classrooms. But today we are joined by two awesome guests that have background in different aspects of this problem that we'll be looking at today. First, I want to introduce Dr. Elizabeth O'Brien. Elizabeth, please introduce yourselves to all of our awesome guests.
Great. Thank you, James. It's wonderful to be here. I am a co-founder and the Chief Impact Officer of Family Engagement Lab, and I have a PhD in school psychology and started my career as a bilingual school psychologist. And I speak Spanish, and a big focus of my research and applied experiences have really been around supporting culturally and linguistically diverse students and families. And I'm here and do the work around family engagement because I've seen the power of strong family school partnership to advance educational equity, and just know how much families have this powerful role in supporting student learning and student success. And we'll be talking more about that today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm super excited to have, not only somebody who thinks about this stuff, but is an expert in the field of math anxiety. Bonnie Jones is a PhD student, but I'll let her introduce herself and share some of her work.
Awesome. Thank you, James. I'm glad to be here too. This is a great opportunity. I've been a math teacher for a lot of years, and the math anxiety has been definitely something on my radar, something I wanted to understand and figure out. And that's really why I left the classroom to work on a PhD to get to do some research in areas that I felt as a teacher were not being considered. So I'm excited to share some of the things that I've gained from the research.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And you're going to be hearing from them very shortly. My name is James. I'm the product marketing manager at Unruly Studios. I've been in education for about 20 years now, first as an educator and then working in education technology. And I'm passionate about trying to figure out ways to make learning more fun, more engaging, and boost students' confidence. So this fits right into what we love doing at Unruly Studios. And so let's dive into our session today. So in our webinar, we are going to be covering a handful of topics. First, we're going to be trying to understand what exactly is math anxiety, then identifying math anxiety in students and discussing strategies and how we might be able to reduce it. But more importantly, it's not about just reducing, it's figuring out ways to build up confidence, especially in a topic like mathematics. And then having our special guests from the Family Engagement Lab here, we're going to be looking at the role that families play. Oftentimes, the relationship between the school and the home is the missing component in holding students back from the success we know that they can make in the classroom. So being able to make sure that that's part of the discussion from the beginning is critical. And then finally, we're going to be answering some of your questions. So if you have questions that come up during the chat, please submit them. And then we're going to open up those at the end and have a chat. I want to start with a quote. And a lot of times when you read quotes, you're like, did he really say that? Or did she really say that? So I had to look and try to find where they said it. But I think it's important to share this one from Albert Einstein. Don't worry about your difficulties in mathematics. I can assure you are far greater than mine. Long story short, we all have stresses. We all have problems. And so it's something just to point out, call out, and figure out how we can do something better going forward. So before we turn to our first topic, though, we want to hear from you. In your experience, what is the most common indicator of math anxiety in students? So go ahead and submit your votes now. And if you don't have a thought just yet, feel free to hold back and watch. But I'd love to hear from you. If you're a school leader or you're in a classroom, please share your responses. And let's see. Wow, right away you're seeing a pretty big trend, negative self-talk afflicting a lot of students today. I think that's pretty powerful. And then avoidance of math-related activities, meaning that they've formed a negative identity around the topic of math or the subject of math. Very, very common. All right, I'm going to close the poll in a few seconds, so feel free if you haven't yet voted. Thank you to the almost 200 people that have. That's awesome. All right, close the poll. All right, so for math anxiety is the state of discomfort or apprehension experienced during mathematical activities. So, some of the things to look for are emotional distress, feelings of worry, or difficulty concentrating. And some of the research highlights that math anxiety affects a significant portion of students. And I think, most of you all have shared that it's around that negative self talk. And math anxiety can negatively impact students' academic performance, leading to lower grades. But most importantly, math will be part of their life forever. And those negative thoughts will be with them where they go. So, our first question, as we dive deeper into understanding math anxiety, it's crucial to recognize not just the obvious symptoms, but what are some of the subtle signs that might be overlooked, Bonnie?
Thanks. Here's some of the things that I have picked up and seen. So off task, avoiding getting started and not turning in and completing assignments, hurrying through assignments and exams, not really trying, um, avoids responding to questions, doesn't ask for help, avoids getting started, has some fear of failure, obsessing over the outcomes, overthinking things, indecisive, having a hard time making decisions, and then they stop trying after they get a problem wrong. Um, so then I have a poll question, which is
Yes.
how what percentage are you of your students? What percentage are these you seeing these signs in your students?
Okay, go ahead and start the second poll, Diane. Thank you. How many of you are seeing that? What's the percentage of your students that are exhibiting these signs? Wow. A lot of students. And you know that as a teacher, you're walking around and you're seeing those things on their faces, those difficulty getting started or the reluctance. And also, so many of the different academic experiences that kids have are set up to where it's like, did you get it right or did you get it wrong? And it creates that instant anxiety in them. And that's something super important to call out and recognize. So, moving on to the next question, with that information in mind, I want to be able to talk about how to identify math anxiety in students. So, here are some of the early warning signs: delaying or avoiding math related tasks, something that we just talked about, giving up easily. So, they get that first question wrong, like Bonnie said, and seeing them shut down and not wanting to move forward. Having Not just having negative feelings, but expressing those negative feelings towards math, the math identity of I'm not a math person, or those things that we're constantly trying to battle against. Worrying excessively, an assessment might be coming up and you can just see that builds fear and anxiety in those students. And just feeling nervous or uneasy before math class, right? They may have been, outgoing and having fun in science during a lab experience, and then math class happens, you see them start to shut down. Well, some of the potential causes of that could be social factors like influence or societal stereotypes, like, I'm a girl, I'm not good at math. That's something that we really need to combat in classrooms. Lack of parental support. A lot of times these kids go home, they don't have a place to study, they don't have the right supports in place to be able to kind of build them back up if they had a rough time at school that day. And then some cognitive factors could be playing a role here, like working memory deficits, something, some more serious stuff that we might want to look at, a learning disability, dyscalculia. I can't even say that word, but like struggling with numbers. So I want to kind of set up the next question. So, like, understanding the early warning signs and potential causes of math anxiety is crucial for a timely intervention, being able to act quickly, because this can carry with them the rest of their lives, especially their academic career. So, my question is for you, Elizabeth: how can teachers and parents work together to identify the early signs of math anxiety in students?
Thanks, James. So, both of these key adults in children's lives have sort of a unique vantage point into students' behavior and needs. So, two-way communication is really essential here. So, on the teacher side, providing regular updates to parents about their child's progress, any observed signs of anxiety that they're seeing in the classroom. And then parents on the other side also sharing the observations of what they're seeing at home. And sort of as you mentioned, James, there's sort of different ways this can show up. And so are there behavioral signs like students avoiding math homework at home, or emotional signs of fear or anxiety around math work, or physical signs like restlessness in those contexts that are requiring math? And then, of course, the academic signs, low performance or lack of participation. And so the more that teachers and parents are communicating and sharing what they're seeing, the more likely they are to really identify those early signs of math anxiety in children, and really more accurately identify math anxiety. And so you can think of it sort of like puzzle pieces that both adults have, and that can help shed light on whether it truly is math anxiety. And just another piece I think is really important is that relationship building with families is going to lay the groundwork for this type of communication and collaboration. So that's something else that's really essential here when you think about how teachers and parents can work together to support students.
Yeah, it's all about, like creating those environments where the students do feel that support. And if you have an ability to extend that to the home through communication, and we'll talk more about home communication later, the better those students are going to be. One of the things that I want to talk about next is looking at the differences between general anxiety and math specific anxiety. You probably read the same stories or seen the same headlines, but a lot of the mental health conditions that used to happen in your 20s and 30s are starting to happen younger and younger, because of maybe students are having more experiences online or social media or whatever the factors may be. So as educators and school leaders, we need to look at how can we best support the students when they are in our care, because it's our custodial role to ensure that we're doing everything we can to support these kids, not just with the skill building, but the emotional skills as well. So, looking at the differences. So, general anxiety is this ongoing worry and restlessness that you're seeing across maybe subjects, not just in math classes. They walk in with that, they walk out with that. You see it in English, you see it in math. They may even be exhibiting those feelings at lunchtime. And this can be a long-term issue, something that has been struggling with for years, in classrooms. Um, and general anxiety can affect relationships. That might affect work, overall well-being. If it's a math-related thing, you would see it in the context of a math class. But once they're not in that context, they might come back to whoever they were before experiencing that. So a math one is tied to math-related tasks. It causes a strong aversion or panic to, like, oh, I don't want to do that, or those high-pressure math situations. It can vary from very mild to something that's pretty severe, depending on the situation. And it can be, identified through self-reporting questionnaires, asking students questions, teachers making observations, being able to kind of put the pieces together themselves. So, the general key differences is, while general anxiety is broader, a chronic condition affecting overall life, math specific anxiety is more situational, tied to direct math tasks, or can be identified through some sort of targeted assessments. Doesn't need a healthcare professional to diagnose, so to speak. So, turning to strategies for reducing math anxiety, we know it exists. I think looking at the poll numbers, a lot of you, around between 20 and 50% of your students, are experiencing this in your classrooms. So, let's look at ways to foster an environment and classroom techniques to create more supportive learning situations. So, one, it's so important to foster a growth mindset. This is almost, table stakes in any classroom these days, knowing that kids can get better if you work hard and persevere through challenges, but also creating a safe space, knowing that, like, everything probably shouldn't be tied to grades or creating high anxiety. But more importantly, how are we balancing the learning activities that they're having? If they're sitting there one to one with the computer, no offense to those programs that serve kids constant questions, that's not learning at its whole. Getting kids out of their seats, moving around, working together, collaborating should be a part of what going to school is. If we could do it all in front of our computer, we just do it at home. We know that doesn't work. But also building a positive math culture, celebrating the wins, or celebrating the mistakes when you persevere through them, or something like that. So I want to chat about the specific types of activities that you might do in a classroom. So Bonnie, in your research and in your experiences, what classroom activities have you found to be the most effective in reducing math anxiety?
Awesome. Before I get into, I want to give a little bit of research background so that the activity, so what I'm sharing makes sense. Because I've come across I don't know how familiar you are with the research of Dr. Martin Seligman and Mayer, and they have done some work at understanding they call it learned helplessness, but they realized in their 50-year report that we all actually have are hardwired with a serotonin pathway to have hope and to be able to overcome adverse conditions. And yet, if the adverse conditions persist, then the being can perceive that they don't have control, and control is the critical element for that hope to be able to move forward. So here's a couple of things to think about, some conditions that I'm seeing how learned helplessness can be developed or can be part of a math classroom. And definitely as a math teacher, I experienced it, and I understand there's no criticism. It's just part of the challenge of the situation we're in. But I think it's something that we're not talking about, that there's some benefit from having the discussion. And first of all, a student puts forth effort and tries to do the work that we've given them to do. And yet they lack some background knowledge that's required or some understanding, and they're not able to be successful. So they make many mistakes, they get a poor grade, and there's their adverse outcome. And if that happens over and over and over again, and they request, assistance, maybe the people they request it from, their friends or their parents, can't give them the assistance they need, or maybe the way we're explaining it doesn't make sense to them. And then that adverse condition exacerbates when they get teased because they're, and they're not good at doing their math, or maybe they get disciplined by their parents because they get poor grades. Those kinds of things make it harder. And then a big challenge for us as teachers is that we have this pressure to move on, this hit all the standards.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't have the skills, and so they're still in that condition. And so the idea here with the activities is to keep them in a hopeful state, knowing if they keep trying, you're going to get them there. You're going to help them get to that place. And sometimes it's hard to do, to have to balance the time with everything. But so here's some of the specific experiences. One of them is to give them multiple relating concepts. Don't just rely on one kind of thing. The more experiences they can have, the more chances they're going to be able to connect to some background knowledge, to some experience they have, and draw on and pull some things together. And then another one is experiences where students are empowered to accurately assess their math themselves and correct themselves. And because a lot of times when they turn it in and get a grade and it's marked on the paper, or even like James mentioned earlier, it's a program that gives them that says yes, it's right, or no, it's wrong, and they don't know that, and so they don't know why, they don't understand that why. And so for me, that comes with it's using a manipulative, and not all manipulatives are as beneficial. But for example, the other day I was and somebody else just mentioned that in the chat, I was working with multi-age kids, and we were doing an activity, and the younger child, she said, oh yeah, we were comparing 2-digit numbers. And she's like, yeah, this one's bigger. And I said, are you sure? Check it and show it to me. And she was able to check her with the manipulatives, check her answer, and be able to say, oh no, I was wrong, and it's this, and accurately get to the right place. Empowering students to be able to figure that out for themselves and not totally relying on you all the time is another critical thing to do. And then another thing, which James alluded to a little bit before on this slide, which is incorporating activities that are not where grades aren't always reported, games and different kinds of things. James used to be part of Breakout EDU, and so I used escape breakouts and scavenger hunts and many different kinds of games and activities where they were learning as they went, and we weren't always giving them a score.
I think that's so powerful, and I want to go back to one of the things that you just said with the pressure to move on. I think that's one of the things that's so hard as a teacher, is grappling with that constant pressure and knowing that, like, if you move on, like, I don't want to say like the left behind phrase, but like the student is not getting the support that they need to master the skills that they're needing to learn next. And so that's super challenging. And that kind of brings us to the next poll question. Number 3, our poll question is, based on your experience, what percentage of elementary teachers are both confident in math and able to explain the concepts in multiple ways until the student fully understands? No, that's a tough question. And even tougher results coming in. And I'm sure, this audience is made up of district leaders, school leaders, classroom leaders, and, you're seeing what we're seeing as, we don't have the skills and the tool belts necessary to combat some of these challenges that we're facing. 55% of you said that only a quarter to half of the teachers in classrooms have what it takes to be able to deliver on this. And it's no fault of theirs. It's just the situation that we're in and the demands on our time. It makes it really, really challenging. So yeah, it's a pretty I don't know, stark landscape out there when it comes to what's going on in classrooms. Um, Next, I want to talk about building that confidence up, and the techniques for fostering efficacy and resilience. So the first one is just emphasizing the growth mindset. And we've already talked about that. Breaking down tasks, putting it into chunks that can be managed in a single sitting, and not creating these overwhelming situations where it's like, answer these 4-part multiple choice plus story question that you'll never get right, but I'm going to grade you on it anyways, type situations. And creating situations where kids can have that positive self-talk, reframing things into an interesting challenge or something that might be fun to conquer together, opportunities to work together, right? In life, when you get stuck on something, you don't just sit there and get a bad grade necessarily right away. You might have opportunities to ask a friend or work together or tackle a challenge. So why not create more situations in our academic environments like math classes to be able to do that and encourage open communications. Right back to you, Bonnie. Do you have any strategies that teachers can use to be able to build math confidence in their students? I know it's similar to what we were talking about, but can you dive deeper a little bit on that topic?
I'd love to. Thanks. So I think, honestly, the strategy I would put at number one, if I was to go back in the classroom, is I would want to have some heartfelt discussions on prioritizing student confidence and success over the standards, and give me the ability to be able to say, I'm going to make sure that I stick with these kids until they've got it, and that I have the ability to do that. And I get that sometimes it could be hard because you've got um, children at so many different levels, and so that's where my next suggestion comes in, and that is creating experiences um, that can be varied for different students. So an example I'll give you uh, ties in with some of these other points that I wanted to make. So if I take a blank, like a checkerboard, and I ask the students if they have played Chutes and Ladders. And many of them have, and those who haven't, we explain how that works. And so they get to design their own Chutes and Ladders game, um, to whatever difficulty they're comfortable with as their group. And then if you roll a dice and you ask this child, how could we use that dice to play the game, they can say add, and I say, well, what if you landed on a chute and you didn't want to go down? Is there something else you can do with the dice? And they're like, oh, we could subtract. And then I say, well, what if you land on another chute? Is there anything else you can do? Because they have manipulatives, they can go, well, you can just subtract the bigger number. And I'll say, well, what does that mean? And they say, well, that means go backwards. And so the beauty of these kinds of experiences is that here's the second grader intuitively getting negative numbers, but then instead of just every time they move, they're evaluating 3 things at once. And so you can oftentimes mix multiple ideas, at once, multiple concepts in one kind of a game or activity. And then the other value of that is they understand going backwards. They relate it to a game, to something that makes sense to them. So you're building that background knowledge all at the same time. And oftentimes as teachers, we're just focused on administering this concept, and they're not really set up to understand it because they don't have enough understanding about the concepts that we're giving them, the skills to develop the skills. They're just going through the motions and they don't have that foundation. And so the collaborative games, like the one I explained to you, the other beauty of those collaborative games is that we talk about the zone of proximal development. If you watch, you probably have seen this too, when you watch kids play a game, if the game allows them to dynamically adjust, they can tell, oh, they're ready for more. Let's amp this up. Now try this. And they'll increase the difficulty naturally and adjust that zone of proximal development intuitively as kids without even having to have any education classes. It's really beautiful to watch. I think that's probably enough from my turn.
Yeah, no, I wanted to actually ask a follow-up question, more curiosity. One of the trends that I've seen over the past 12 years is the introduction of adaptive content solutions, tools where kids are at a computer answering a series of questions. Sometimes they're gamified, sometimes they're not. And it's easy for a teacher, not necessarily easy, but facilitating that, you get to stand back and watch the kids all on the laptops answering questions from. And again, I don't want to say anything negative about those companies specifically, but I'm more curious, in terms of math anxiety, how should we look at balancing those types of programs with things like the game development that you just mentioned and the other types of activities that we know boost confidence, because I'm sure it's a pretty big trade-off and a lot of district or school pressure coming down on teachers.
Oh, totally. And I actually got our math program into using those tools, just because that seemed like a great way to go. And it was really helpful when COVID came, because at the end of 2020, our kids were already used to doing math online, and that was really helpful. But it's not always as beneficial because um, if they can set up the problem, their own problem, and give it to somebody else to do, and they're doing problems for each other, if they're setting up the problem and solving the problem, their skill's much higher than if they're just responding to somebody else giving them the problem. And they learn a whole lot by doing that, by being able, and again, that for me, I've found that that's the case with, if I've used manipulatives, then they have the understanding to be able to just set up the problem. And just on a fun side note, I had taught 10th grade math for my last years, and I had to leave one day because my son was going through chemo, and my students were doing this where they were setting up their own quadratic equations, and then their partners were factoring them. And I came back, and my students had put this massive quadratic equation for me to factor on the board. It had the coefficients were like 15 digits long, and they're like, we broke 3 calculators figuring this out. But it was so fun that they figured out how to set up the problem, and they could get it really complex, and they knew I could solve it because I just would have to undo what they did to create it, which is really fun.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Bonnie. And also, Bonnie, you have some fans in the chat that are dying for the links to the math game stuff. So if you have anything there, great. And if not, we will be sending out an email to everyone, and we'll be sure to include anything from that as well. And also, thank you everyone so far who's added questions or submitted questions for the Q&A section later. And then Mary, thank you so much. I will send you the $20 I promised you for writing that nice comment. All right, let's move on. We have another section, and I want to turn our attention to the home. And like I said at the beginning, the relationship with the families from the beginning can really boost a kid's not only confidence but success in school, because it does take the entire team of people supporting him or her in and out of the classroom. So before turning our attention to Elizabeth, we have a poll question for you. This poll question is all about: what types of updates have been the most effective in advancing your partnership with families to support students' math learning? So go ahead and turn that poll question on, and I'll be sure to share the results with you all after they come in. Now I'm getting comments from people at Unruly saying that Mary is a plant, and I put her in there. So no, she's a real person, Brendan. I know you're watching. All right, so the overwhelming response, 65% of you all are saying that moments of success need to go home. And that's really interesting. I agree. I always, love when the teacher would say something nice, and not James is in the principal's office again. So go ahead and finish up that poll question. All right. Let's turn to the topic of the role of parent and guardians. So if we look at it, it all comes down to communication between teachers and families. So, obviously the school leaders are important too, or the district's important too, but usually those are just overwhelming emails with 10 opportunities and things like that. But the actual conversations going on between the teacher and that parent or guardian, and making sure that that is a two-way street with open lines of communication, sharing regular progress, celebrating success. That was the number one response that you all had shared. Providing resources, because a lot of times as parents, even as an educator parent myself, I struggle with how can I best support my kindergartner, because I've never taught kindergarten. And so anytime the teacher can say, hey, try this resource, or here's how you can find a good book, those are super helpful. Practical tips and promoting a positive math mindset at home. So my question for you, Elizabeth, is what role do families play in supporting math confidence, and how can teachers best facilitate this?
Thanks, James. So families can play a very influential role here and support math confidence at home in many different ways. So families have this opportunity to integrate math into the activities that they are already doing. So things like if you're cooking, there's an opportunity for measuring. If you're grocery shopping, there's opportunities to calculate costs. Are you doing a project where you need measuring? So families have this position where they can sort of show the relevance of math learning outside of the classroom, which can help increase students' motivation and engagement in math inside of the classroom. And families also are in this position to layer on real personal connections and help bring math to life for their children. Another piece I think is huge is just how families are modeling their attitudes and behaviors towards math. And so parents who demonstrate that positive attitude towards math are just, way more likely to be able to have kids. Oh, hold on one second. I got locked. Who really are able to, like, they're seeing and watching you, and they're taking all of that in. So it's a really important moment. And I think teachers have such an also important role in helping to facilitate this. And so teachers can be, again, we talked about sharing those open communication, sharing what's going well, giving parents that sort of unique perspective into like what are they seeing in the classroom and how can families help at home. And I think another key piece is, families need to get information in a way that's really accessible. And so for teachers to be thinking about, like, am I ensuring that this information is communicated in families' home language in a way that's jargon free? All of that is really important. And then I think there's some connection points from some of the things that you all have mentioned, like, are there games that families can play at home that can reinforce math concepts? Are there ways that families can do sort of interactive types of projects around math together with their kids? And so some of those pieces I think are really important too. And I think, we talked about like how in classrooms we can approach mistakes. The same thing can happen at home. Like, how are families talking about mistakes? Is this like an opportunity to learn? And I think families also modeling in themselves, like, oh, this is how math is part of my life, or, oh, I made a mistake and I learned XYZ. That can be really, really powerful for students. And yeah, thank you, James, for putting some links in the chat too. We've got a lot more information too all around, family's important role here and just that important partnership between families and teachers.
That is super helpful, Elizabeth. I think one of the games that we play at home with our kindergartner, who's just learning very basic math stuffs at this point, is Sleeping Queens. I don't know if y'all have played Sleeping Queens, but it is fantastic, because if you want to discard, you have to be able to like add up numbers and create a little math formula, and you're trying to like get all this queens on your side, and then if you get over 30 points, so it's really very basic number stuff, but it's a super fun card game, and I believe it was invented by kids and their parents. So kind of a fun thing to look at. All right, so the next topic is, you're coming out of this webinar, you have lots of different ideas, you want to, combat math anxiety and build math confidence, but like where to start? It's super overwhelming. There's tons of resources, tons of tools, and you can quickly get overwhelmed. So I want to kind of share a framework for how to think about this. Most importantly, start small. Like start with something that you can, take. Maybe it's one day of the week, maybe a fun Friday where you're introducing a new concept or a new activity that you wouldn't normally do, and see how it goes. And if that, you see positive results and kids are perking up a little bit more, you might want to do more of that. But then being very clear around like, why are we doing this? How do we want to do it? And keep it very structured. But again, it's like an experiment. Build yourself a classroom sandbox where you can try new things that might be able to cultivate math confidence, maybe adding in choice or flexibility. Hey, we're trying to learn 2-digit multiplication. Here's 2 different ways. It might be some sort of, escape room puzzle or a game or some sort of at center. And we'll talk about unruly math in a second that you add. Totally up to you, but integrate it into your existing curriculum. Don't feel the pressure of needing to overhaul everything and the pressures of the standards and how to do all of that stuff. Those are not going to go away. So how can you, find areas to add innovation in your own practice, and then just gather feedback. And this can be very informal, looking at what's working and make changes. You're going to make mistakes. Things aren't going to work all the time, and we've all been there before. So just be thinking about that as we go. My question for Bonnie, who's done a lot of this stuff and even had kids build their own games and do pretty big, awesome things, how can technology be integrated into math instruction to build confidence and reduce anxiety?
Awesome. Thank you. So uh, there's definitely I think kids can gain some with some programs where they're practicing. If it helps them, supports them when they get it wrong, that practice can help give them um, some skill and some confidence to be able to get where they need to go. Another thing that you may not have thought of is there's some technology that gives students the ability to simulate and see what happens if things changed. Desmus is one of my favorites, is because then they can see, well, what happened. There's a marble slides when it's for a little bit older kids, but there's different things where you can see if I change the equation, what happens? What does that do? Can I get the marble to go where I want it to go? Can I do these different kinds of things? And your students can actually build their own kinds of activities within it, and you can set them up too. So there's a lot of the simulations are really good to help out with that. Another thing that is you may not have thought of is that using digital dice and random number generators and cards, and that facilitates the ability for students to get their own random numbers and then have to create problems based on those and gameplay and different kinds of things. I think that's a great resource for using technology in those kinds of ways that isn't necessarily it's a tool that's helpful, but it's not like they're stuck on just focusing on the screen.
Those are super helpful, and it's a good setup to our next conversation, which are some specific tools and resources that we wanted to call out. Both Elizabeth and Bonnie provided a resource that they want to take a moment to talk about, and then I'll share with you about Unruly Math and how schools are transforming teaching and learning with that tool as well. So without further ado, Elizabeth, please tell us about the awesome work going on at the Family Engagement Lab.
All right. Well, first, I wanted to say I love these family focus ideas that are coming in the chat. So appreciate that. And I think there's some really innovative ways that folks here are engaging families in their classrooms. So yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about Family Engagement Lab. It is a national nonprofit committed to advancing equitable academic outcomes for students across the country through family engagement. And we have a program called Fast Talk, which stands for Families and Schools Talk. And through Fast Talk, it's a scalable, cost-effective tool for teachers that sends curriculum aligned learning activities to families by text message in their home language. So parents get a sense of, oh, what's my child working on in school right now in math, in ELA, and what can I do at home to reinforce those concepts, and all of that coming in a way that's really accessible and actionable and in families' home languages. And I just wanted to note too that on our site you'll find, information on Fast Talk's impact on student learning outcomes, and also some helpful resources for teachers, school leaders, districts, states. And there's an opportunity to sign up for a monthly learning series we have, which is a lot of big best practices and updates in K-12 related to family engagement. And of course, ways to get in touch if you want to learn more. So thank you, James, for being able to share a little bit more about Family Engagement Lab as well.
Yeah, it's so important when building those strong connections between the school and the family, and the earlier the better, and the more the better, in my opinion. Bonnie, please tell us a little bit about Rethink Learning.
Sure. Rethink Learning is a nonprofit that's a national organization. They have two areas of focus. One is the research that backs. So we have evidence-based decisions, or putting out there how the evidence is helping us know what is appropriate for schools, and what's best learning science, I guess, of what's going out there. And then we also have a professional development arm that's putting things together to help teachers. And with that, we are, I mentioned a couple times, math manipulatives. The ones that I've used that are really helpful, because for students to really be able to empower them to do what I've talked about, have become really expensive. They're getting close to the cost of a Chromebook, and I'm like, oh, that's a little. There's got to be. So we're in the process of seeing if we can get manipulatives for a lot less, so we can provide those for teachers. And then there's several people mentioned in the chat that they would be really interested in the games. We're going to have a place for you to access those, and then to be able to share your ideas, and also even just share how your students altered the games. How they did this, they changed it. I was doing a game. We had a grid, and it was really just multiplication, and they were doing rectangles, and they developed the rules of the game. And then one student was like, well, hey, wait, what if we made our rectangle so it was over the top of somebody else's? And that was added a lot more complexity to it. So they, having those ideas of how the students altered the games. And honestly, I think it's really beneficial to have resources like that for teachers, because you don't often get, the support and the resources you need to explain math in different ways, to help students experience math in different ways, especially at the elementary level. I didn't, even as a high school teacher either. And so I think that we're trying to provide those kinds of resources for you teachers.
So that is super important. Thank you so much, Bonnie. The other resource I just wanted to call out. There are so many awesome, leaders in the math education space. So I could have, picked anyone, but one that I thought was really, really good, and we look up to at Unruly is Joe Bowler, and her mathematical mindsets. Really thinking about growth mindset, open-ended problem solving, creativity. All of the type of stuff that we know builds confidence in students. Right now, and I'll chat about Unruly Math in just a moment. But before I do, I wanted to hear from you and tell me, do you have any resources or tools or things that you've done to help boost math confidence in the classrooms, whether you're at the leadership level at the district, the school, in the classroom? What have you done or seen? So take a peek at the chat if you want to get some other awesome resources or strategies that some educators from around the country and world are using. Mindsets Learning, Reflex. Yeah, lots of cool apps. Yeah, Desmos, I know, Bonnie, you pointed that out. That's a really good one. I enjoy that as well. Lots of different games. And then this is a good time too. One final call out. If you have any questions for us, we will have a few moments at the end for questions and answers. So to get those submitted now. I know Katrina, you just submitted one. Thank you so much, and a few others. Again, lots of tools coming in. Bottle, booklet, all sorts of stuff. Right. Next, I want to share with you about Unruly Math. I am so excited that, one, we had the opportunity to help put this webinar on today. But two, it was a personal decision because I just believe so strongly in what we're up to. So at Unruly, we believe in a type of learning that fosters long-term gains and nurtures healthy, well-rounded individuals. And I think, so often we just get bogged down in like schools doing quick standardized test stuff. And for us at Unruly, it's about the whole student. And we envision a world where students regularly get out of their seats and engage in collaborative activities that challenge their fears and build their confidence, so missing in classrooms today. We believe schools must take a measured approach with screens. Yes, one-to-one screens can be good for a lot of things, but is there balance? How much is too much? Things like that. We don't see technology as just a tool, and we want to make sure that it enhances rather than overwhelms the learning experience. So our commitment is to create learning opportunities that cultivate self-assurance and resilience. We look ahead to a future where students will inherit, and we recognize that, no, we look ahead to the future that these kids are going to be going into, and they are going to be forced to take on problems that are really challenging, and it's not going to be solved in a multiple choice question. So we are dedicated to preparing these future leaders through dynamic, interactive, and collaborative learning environments. So what I'm saying is you should take a demo and check out Unruly Math. Like, it's super awesome, getting kids out of their seats. You'll get emails from us too. So to check it out. It's, I really honestly feel like, the future of why we go to school is not just to sit in front of a computer, but get out of your seat, move around, solve problems. And they're all super easy for teachers to set up and go. So I look forward to telling you more in a demo very, very soon. We have about 10 minutes for our Q&A. So let me figure out which button to click to pull up those questions. Here they are. All right. Oh, good first question. Glenda, your question is, how can we address math anxieties in adults/teachers? Bonnie, any tips for Glenda? How do we support the teachers? Because we know that so many teachers either are underprepared or struggle with the same anxieties.
That's a great question, and I had actually skipped to that part because the latest research shows that 93% of adults have some level of math anxiety. So, we're part of that 93%. It's not surprising that that we all should have that. And I think for me, that it made a huge difference when I had tools that helped me understand it at a basic level. One of the things that I found in the research that was interesting is that the preschool and elementary teachers felt that they could teach the math, but they weren't always confident with the math. And I think that the challenge there is they think they should be able to teach math because it's the basics and it should be easy, but it's not. It still is complex. There still are, multiple steps and things that we're asking these children to do, and they're not it's not easy to do that. So figuring out ways to so for a teacher, I would say latch on to some things that will help you understand it in better ways. For me, that was the manipulatives. When I saw a 4-year-old factor a quadratic equation with manipulatives, I was like, "You got to be kidding me! It's that easy? How come I had to do it the hard way?" And I think that there's a lot of that in there where it really can be a lot easier. And we're hoping to do that with our professional development, is make it easier for you so that you're like, "Oh, how come I had to learn it the hard way? This is so much easier than I thought it was." And that you have more more perspectives to bring to the learning experience instead of just, "Here, follow these steps." Because I think we've done a disservice in not preparing our elementary teachers to give their students, a variety of ways of doing things.
Great
Yeah.
answer. The next question, and I'll take a first crack at chatting about it, and then anybody else who wants to chime in, please do so. The question is, what is your opinion on math programs like ST Math? And for me, this is an interesting one. In my former life, I was the kind of the technology integration person for KIPP schools in California, up in the North Bay. And we were doing some of the very first pilots for Khan Academy when they were trying to figure out if Khan Academy should be done in classrooms and doing some of those early tests. And what I found was in our experience, that the most important role and the most important factor in any of these things is the role of the teacher and how these programs are used ultimately has the biggest bearing on, are they effective or not? If these programs are seen as a way that they can just like babysit the kids with math problems, throughout the period of time, then they're not going to be effective. A lot of the other skills that need to be developed are going to be ignored, and it's going to lead to problems down the road. When it's like a very strategic use of like, okay, I know this kid needs a little bit of practice on this topic, like let me use one of these, adaptive content solutions or personalized learning solutions, like then it might be a little bit more effective. But again, it's being fully aware of what's going on in the environment and why you're choosing to do it, versus just like, let's get every kid on ST Math and chase a penguin around for 50 minutes. Great, that was math class, go on to the next one. You're going to be losing a lot of the skills and ultimately, cultivating a lot of anxieties that weren't necessary, that were avoidable, in my opinion. And I don't think it's the program's fault. It's just how the program was being used or abused is fault. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add to that? But those are my thoughts.
I would add that paying attention to how the students are using it also. I found my students with one of the programs that I tried, they were just really good at guessing. And I would say, "How did you get this high score?" "I don't know, I just guessed." And they could guess their whole way through and get this high score, and they still didn't have a clue as to what it was, what the concept was. So there's that's also that, looking at how, because it's a game for them. It's how to be successful, how to get through things so they can have a break and be done. And so you want to see how they're using it too. Make sure it's beneficial to the child.
It's a super good point to make. I think one final question, maybe two more questions. The question is, does the research indicate that even students higher up the school ladder, high school, would be able to overcome math anxiety, and get into a growth mindset? Or like, does the ability to adopt a growth mindset and all of the things that we know helps battle anxiety go away as kids get older and it's just more ingrained in their ways?
So I have not found any research that specifically has investigated that. That there is actually some, research that says yes, they can get over it. I I I don't think it'll surprise you, but I think it's conditional on, some students will say, "Oh, I did really well with math this one year." And that teacher was able to help me get past it. They were able to have confidence, that confidence came back that one year. They found success and but then it doesn't, I have found from my experience, because I taught 10th grade math, that it doesn't completely go away. It's always still subtly there. Even your kids that are your A students, they're still experiencing this anxiety because they're always worried that they're still not going to get it right, that there's going to be something that's going to be out there that they don't understand, they don't get. So it's not just your kids who are failing, it's your upper kids too. And I used to spend, my goal was to get everybody in the class believing they could be successful by mid-year. So I lost the first half of the year basically for a lot of kids, because over 85% of them were coming in, "I'm dumb at math, I can't do math." The parents were saying they were too. The parents were dumb at math, so they couldn't help them. They were hoping to just survive the year, and I could get them there, and I could get them to feel like they could be successful. But there was still always this lingering anxiety that was turmoiling underneath. When is it going to change? When is it going to, things going to be different? So I haven't seen that it's been able to be mitigated, at least after 10 years of not being successful in math.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of research around just neuroplasticity in general and how we have that for most of our life, right? I think the example I read about last night was a person who became blind because of a science lab accident in their middle age, and the way their brain was able to rewire itself, adapting their fingers for braille. And now if you touch their finger with something, the sensors on the brain scan lights up, whereas before it never would. So your brains can quickly, adapt and change. It does come down to, a belief of that is probably the most important thing, and a belief that you can change impacts that more than anything. And Elizabeth, there is a question for you. I know you didn't think there would be that many. Would introducing some of the classroom technology stuff be useful for demonstrations at a parent teacher night? And kind of talk a little bit about if you have any examples about parent teacher nights in general, and how those can be critical moments in developing those relationships.
Yes, I think that's a great idea of a way to sort of bring families into the classroom experience. And like we've been talking about, people are learning information in a lot of different ways. That multimodal approach is really valuable across sort of like the learner lifespan. And so I think having families get the opportunity to see the different ways that math is happening in the classroom, and then also layering on though what are the applications to the home setting, like providing some of those ideas, giving short actionable sort of tips and activities that families can take back that maybe leverage some of the same processes that are happening in the classroom. So I think those in-person touch points are a wonderful way to form relationships and like deepen families' understanding of what's happening in the math classroom.
Well, it's a perfect way to end. Elizabeth, Bonnie, thank you all so much for taking your time to join us today and share your experiences about this topic from two very different perspectives, which is very valuable. Everyone who's watching and or is watching on the recording, please, when you get an email from me sharing all these resources and asking you to take a demo to check out Unruly Math, do that. Like, that's for me. It's not like a random person or some spam bot. That's me writing an email to you. Click the button, take the demo. It would be awesome if you did that. But regardless, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your summer. I know school's starting soon for a lot of you. Maybe it already is going on. And we look forward to seeing you at our next EdWeb webinar with Unruly Math. So thank you all so much for taking your time and joining us today.